In September of 2001, on a Tuesday morning I had expected to spend on stolen chainsaws, a man walked into the sheriff's office in Port Angeles carrying a green aluminum camera case with moss grown into the latches, set it on my counter like it was hot, and said, "We found this 40 feet up a tree, and my brother says it belongs to that fellow who went missing off the hoe in '89. And mister, we do not want it in the truck anymore. And I want to be honest with you, from the first minute of this account, friends, the way I was not allowed to be honest for 25 years. I knew the case the moment I saw it. I had written the serial number of that case into an evidence inventory myself, 12 years earlier, standing in a dead man's tent in the rain, off a list his sister gave us: camera, tripod, green Halliburton case. And the case had not been in the tent, and not been in the 5 square miles around the tent that 200 people combed on their hands and knees. And here it was, on my counter, with a logger's thumbprint in the moss. And inside it, when the state lab in Olympia opened it under proper light 2 days later, was Errol Sandvin's camera, dry as the day it was bought, with a roll of film in it. And on the last 3 frames of that roll was the reason you have never heard this story. I was the detective of record on both ends of it. Friends, the tent in '89 and the case in 2001. And I have outlived the order they gave me and the men who gave it. And I am going to describe those 3 photographs to you tonight, one at a time, in the order they were taken, because I have carried them behind my eyes for a quarter of a century, and I am done carrying them alone. And I will tell you now, so you can decide whether to stay by this lamp, what the third one was. The third photograph was taken from 40 feet in the air, straight down, through the branches, at the roof of Errol Sandvin's slashed-open tent. And Errol Sandvin is in the picture. He is kneeling in the mud beside his own tent, in his socks, with his head all the way back, looking up into the lens. And friends, whatever you are picturing right now, his face was worse. But it is the question that has kept me company every November, since that I give you to hold tonight, the question the state of Washington paid to bury. If Errol Sandvin is on the ground, on his knees, looking up into his own camera, then what is holding the camera? Before we go into that forest, and it is like no forest you have stood in, do one small thing for a retired county detective. Put in the comments where you are tonight, your town, your state, and whether you have ever been somewhere so quiet you could hear your own heart change its mind. I read all of them. It is the closest thing to a witness list an old man gets. My name is Walt Sorley. For 31 years, I was a deputy and then a detective with the sheriff's office of Jefferson County, Washington, which is a county most Americans could not place. And yet, I promise you have seen it. Because every time Hollywood needs a forest that looks older than sin, they come to us. The west side of the Olympic Peninsula, friends. The Hoh River Valley. It is a rainforest, a true one, the largest temperate rainforest left on this earth. And I need you to understand what that word means before you can understand this case. Because the word rainforest gets used for postcards, and it is not a postcard. 12 to 14 feet of rain falls on that valley in a year. Not inches, friends, feet. The trees are Sitka spruce and western hemlock, 300 feet tall and 1,000 years old, standing so close and so layered that on a clear noon the valley floor gets a green twilight, and on a November afternoon it gets something I have no polite word for. Every surface of that forest, every trunk, every rock, every fallen log is upholstered in a foot of moss, and the moss does a thing to sound that I have watched unsettle hardened men. It eats it. No echo, No rustle, no report. A rifle fired in the hoe sounds like a book dropped on a carpet. You can stand 10 feet off an established trail in that country, 10 feet, and be, for every practical purpose of the human eye, gone. The search and rescue people on the peninsula have a saying that I did not appreciate until the November I am going to tell you about. In the desert, you die of thirst. In the mountains, you die of cold. In the hoe, you die of 10 feet. And there is one more thing about that forest you need in your pocket. Before we go on, friends, one thing the postcards never show, because you cannot photograph it from the ground. The hoe is not one forest. It is two, stacked. There is the forest we walk in, the lobby, the ferns and the trunks and the trail, and then, 100 feet over your head and going up 200 more, there is the canopy, and the canopy of an old-growth rainforest is its own country. Friends, I have had the university people explain it to me twice. There are soils up there, actual soil, feet deep, lying on the great limbs, meadows of it, with plants that live and die 100 feet up and never touch the earth, and salamanders, friends, whole populations that are born and grow old in the crown of one tree and never once in their lives come down. The biologists call it the last unexplored habitat in North America, and they mean it as a wonder, and it is one. But walk under it in November, in the green dark, with the rain standing in the air, and say those words to yourself the way a detective says them. An unexplored country, directly overhead, everywhere you go, the whole time, and nothing that lives there is obliged to come down and introduce itself. We watch the ground, friends. Every hunter, every hiker, every searcher, every dog, our whole kind, watching the floor of a building 300 feet tall. Errol Sandvin was one of the few who ever looked up for a living, looked up on purpose, with good glass. Hold that. Errol Sandvin knew all of that better than most, which is the first stone in the wall of this case, friends, because nothing about him fits the shape of the accidents. He was 34 in the fall of 1989, a quality control engineer at the pulp mill in Aberdeen, unmarried, careful, quiet, the kind of man whose apartment we later walked through and found the canned goods alphabetized. His one extravagance was photography. Serious about it, friends. Not a snap shooter, a Nikon, and good glass and a heavy tripod, and a dark room rigged in his bathroom. And what he photographed, almost only, was that forest. Big trees. He had a project going back years, his sister told me, photographing the named giants, the record spruces and hemlocks, and the unnamed ones he found himself. And he kept a log of them, coordinates and girth, and his own private names for them, written in a draftsman's hand. On Friday, the 3rd of November, 1989, he told his shift supervisor he was taking 5 days into the Hoe backcountry, off-trail, up one of the feeder drainages, to photograph, and I quote the supervisor's statement, a tree he had been saving. He filed a route card at the ranger station like the careful man he was. He parked his Datsun at the trailhead, shouldered a week of gear, and walked up the Hoe trail into the green dark. And a young couple day hiking near the 5-mile marker passed him around 2 in the afternoon and said good day to him. And he said good day back and stepped off the trail to let them by. And the woman told me later, and it stayed with her enough that she wrote us about it twice over the years, that by the time they had gone 20 steps, and she glanced back, there was simply forest. Friends. No man, no motion, no sound of a man. 10 feet. And that ordinary, polite sideways step off the trail on the 3rd of November, 1989, is the last time any human being saw Errol Sandvin, unless you count. And God help me, friends. After 25 years, I still do not know whether to count it. the eye of his own camera, 3 nights later, looking down at him from the canopy. Errol was due out Wednesday the 8th and due at the mill Thursday morning. And Thursday at 10 his supervisor called his sister. And his sister, who knew her brother's habits, the way you know a clock's, did not wait the polite extra day. She called the park. The park confirmed the route card, and the Datsun still sitting at the trailhead, with 4 days of pollen and needlefall on the glass. And by Friday morning, the 10th of November, the machine was turning. Rangers, sheriff's deputies, Olympic Mountain Rescue, and me, a 38-year-old detective who caught the case because I had grown up hunting elk on that side of the peninsula and was presumed, wrongly, friends, to therefore understand that forest. Nobody understands that forest. The route card gave us his drainage and his tree log, which his sister brought us in a shoebox. God bless that methodical family. Gave us candidate groves, and the weather gave us nothing but its standard November product. 39 degrees and raining, all day, every day. The kind of rain that does not fall so much as stand in the air and lean on you. 200 and some searchers worked that valley in shifts, and it was a dog team that found the camp on the 4th day, Tuesday the 14th. A bloodhound named Duchess, and her handler, a tough, kind woman named Ione Bratsburg, who had pulled living people out of that peninsula for 15 years. And what happened with Duchess at that camp is the first of the things in this account that I was never able to write into a report in any words that did not get me looked at. So I will just tell you, plain, what I watched a good dog do. Duchess ran Errol's scent off a shirt from the Datsun, strong and happy, up the drainage, off trail, an hour, and came over a mossed log into a little natural clearing under a giant spruce, and stopped. Not lost the scent, friends. I have watched dogs lose scent. They cast, they circle, they work. Duchess stopped like a cart hitting a wall, sat down in the wet moss 10 feet short of the tent, pointed her nose at the ground, and began to whine, and would not take one more step forward for love nor jerky. And Ione Bratsburg looked at her dog for a long moment, and then at the tent, and then she said to me, quietly, over her shoulder, the sentence I have measured every crime scene against since. Detective, in 15 years, I have never seen her do this. The scent does not leave this clearing. It does not walk out anywhere. It just ends. The camp itself, friends, I can give you in a detective's inventory, because I wrote it, kneeling under a tarp in the rain, and I have it still, word for word, behind my eyes. 1 2-man mountain tent, professionally pitched, guide to roots and deadfall, taut and true. 1 camp stove, cold, half a pot of rice and beans beside it under a lid, gone over but orderly. 1 bear line, correctly hung, food bag up. 1 tripod, friends, note the tripod, standing folded against the log, and no camera on it, and no camera anywhere. And the tent door zipper was closed from the inside and worked. I ran it myself with a gloved finger, smooth as new, and 18 inches to the left of that working door. The nylon of the tent wall had been cut from the inside, 1 long stroke and 2 short ones, by the knife we found still in the grass. His knife, and the cut peeled outward. And a man had gone out through that cut, in such a hurry that he took the tent's rainfly half off its stakes going. Now stand where I stood, friends, 39 degrees and raining ice, and look at the doorway of that tent, at the neat vestibule inside it, and see what I saw, and could not file. Errol Sandvin's boots, both of them, side by side, laces loosened for the night, standing in the dry of the vestibule 6 inches from the door he did not use. His sleeping bag was flung back the way you fling covers. His headlamp was in the bag, dark. His glasses, Friends, his eyeglasses, were folded in the boot where a careful man puts his glasses at night. A 34-year-old engineer with 20 years of woodcraft woke in the black middle of a freezing November night. Did not put on his boots, did not put on his glasses, did not switch on the light and arms reach from his hand, did not use a working zipper, but instead cut his shelter open with a knife and went out through the wall in stockinged feet into a rain that would kill a shirt-sleeved man by morning. And went where? Duchess says nowhere, friends. Duchess says the scent ends in the clearing, 10 feet from the cut. And the mud says the same. And I will testify to the mud till they close the lid on me, because I photographed it myself before the rain took it. There were sock prints, clear ones, from the cut in the tent wall, out into the open middle of the clearing. 11 of them. 11 prints of a man's feet in socks, each one deeper at the toe than the heel. A walking man, then a striding man. And then the 12th place where a print ought to be. Friends, there is no print. There is nothing. Undisturbed moss and needle cast. I put my face a hand's width off the ground with a flashlight held flat. Nothing. Not in front, not to either side, not behind. 11 steps out of a cut tent into the middle of a clearing, and the 12th step was never taken. And the scent ends. And 200 people, and 3 helicopters, and the best dogs in the state spent 19 more days proving, at the taxpayer's expense, what Duchess in the Mud had told us in the first hour. Errol Sandvin did not walk out of that clearing. Errol Sandvin stopped being on the ground. I did not write that last sentence in my report, friends, you understand? What the report said, when the county closed the file the week before Christmas of '89, was, subject presumed to have suffered a nocturnal medical or psychological event, left shelter improperly clothed, presumed deceased of hypothermia, remains unrecovered. And every word of that is defensible, and every word of it is a lie of arrangement. The truth's furniture pushed around until the room looks ordinary. I signed it. You sign it, friends. That is how the file drawer closes. That is how the county goes on. That is how the sister gets the insurance settled, and the mother gets a stone with his name on it. In the Aberdeen cemetery, over an empty box. I signed it, and I kept my photographs of 11 sock prints in a folder that stayed in my desk through 3 office moves. And every November, friends, every November for 12 years, I will confess it here, since I am confessing things. I took that folder out on some quiet afternoon and looked at it, at print 11, at the clean moss where 12 should be. And I would sit there with my coffee going cold, and the question I could not put down was never, where did he go, friends? The question was the tripod, the folded tripod against the log, because his sister had said it from the first day, and I had heard it and not heard it, the way you do. He went up there to photograph a tree he had been saving. So where was the camera? 12 years is a long time in a county office and no time at all in that forest. I made detective sergeant. I worked burglaries and a bad summer of arsons and 2 homicides that were exactly as stupid and sad as homicides actually are. And I attended, without ever once planning to, the small Lutheran service the Sandvin family held each November in Aberdeen, standing at the back with my hat in my hands, and Errol's sister would find me at the coffee afterward, every year, friends, every single year, and she never once asked, "Did you find anything new?" because she knew I would have called. What she asked, every year, holding her coffee in both hands, was, "Is it still strange to you?" That was her whole question. And every year I said, "Yes, ma'am, it is still strange to me." And she would nod, satisfied. And friends, I came to understand that I was not attending that service as a detective at all. I was attending as the county's official rememberer of the strangeness. The one man in a position of stamp and seal who had stood in that clearing and would say out loud, once a year, that the furniture of the official story did not sit level. You who have followed this channel a while know that a file is never really closed, friends. It is only quiet. And in September of 2001, on a Tuesday, the Sandven file cleared its throat. If this is your first evening at this lamp, here is where I pull over for half a minute, and no more. This channel is one retired man, and a lamp, and the accounts nobody wanted in the drawer. Told plain, no music stings, no dressed-up nonsense. Dread at the speed it actually comes, which is slow. If that is worth your evening, subscribe, so the next account finds you. And when this one is done tonight, do me a particular kindness. Look at whatever tall thing stands over your house, a tree, a water tower, a dark hill, and ask yourself how long it has been since anybody looked up it properly. Then come back and finish your coffee. You will see why. The Decker brothers were Jippo loggers, friends, which on the peninsula means small, independent, and not overly ceremonial about property lines. And on a September morning in 2001, they were dropping a big second-growth spruce on a strip of state land up a spur road on the flank of the Hoh Valley. A strip, I will note for the record, that they did not have paper for. Which matters, because it tells you what it cost them to walk into my office anyway. And I want you to see that morning the way the older Decker told it to me, because he told it the same way 3 times over the years, word for word, and men only do that with mornings that marked them. Low fog in the cut, he said. The saw warm, everything usual, and the spruce went over clean and hit and bounced the way a big one does, and the fog jumped off the whole clearing at the impact, and then, in the settling quiet, something came sliding and knocking down through the wrecked crown end over end, and landed in the moss not 15 feet from his brother. A green metal case. And here is the detail, friends, that neither of those hard-handed men could say without stopping first. It did not come down like a thing that had been lying loose in the branches for years, shaken free. The lashing they saw when they walked up on it had been cut, sheared clean through by a limb, folding in the fall. Sure, that is the daylight explanation. The strap parted in the wreck. But the case came down after the tree settled, friends, in the quiet, seconds after, and it landed flat, latches up, square in the open moss between the two of them, in the one clear yard of ground and an acre of slash. And the older Decker looked at it, steaming faintly in the cold, and his first thought, he told me, and he was not a fanciful man, his first thought was not, look what fell. His first thought was, this is being given to us. The tree came down at 7 in the morning, and laid out in the wreck of its crown, at what they measured after, with their own tapes because they could not believe it, was 41 feet above the ground when the tree stood, was a green aluminum camera case, and it was not resting in those branches, friends. It was fastened to them, lashed to the trunk side of a limb, up under the canopy shadow, where no one glassing from the ground would ever pick it out, with a black nylon strap. And when the Olympia lab and I sat with that strap under the magnifier, 2 days later we identified it without difficulty, because it was inventoried in 89 off the sisters list. It was the carrying strap of Errol Sandvin's tripod. The tripod that I had photographed leaning folded against a mossy log, 40 feet below, and we ran the survey twice, 210 feet north of that very tree. And the knot, friends. I want the knot in this account, because the knot is where the men in the room stopped making jokes. It was tied in a tight, seaman-like series of half hitches, competent, deliberate, tied by something that understood tension and load. And it was tied on the trunk side, the inside, between the limb and the bole of the tree, in a gap you could not get a man's shoulders into, in a way that the lab man, Leland Duff, a dry, literal 30-year state examiner, with no poetry in him whatsoever, described in his written notes, which I have a copy of, in the following words. The fastening orientation is consistent with the case having been secured by an agent positioned above the limb, working downward, or within the crown itself, working outward. It is not consistent with placement by a climber ascending from below. And then Leland Duff, in a state forensic document, Friends, did a thing I never saw him do in 30 years of dry pages. He added a sentence with no measurement in it. He wrote, in his own hand, I have no third alternative to offer. And the film, Friends, the film should have been the end of it, and instead it was the door. Kodachrome 64, 12 years in a case in a rainforest canopy, through 12 freezes and 12 thaws, and something on the order of 140 feet of cumulative rainfall on that limb. And the case gaskets were good, but no gasket is that good. There was moss in the latches, and Leland Duff told me on the phone, before he ran it, do not hope, Walt. We will get fog and vinegar. That film is dead. It was dead by 94. And then he ran it. And he called me back the same night at my house, which he had never done in our whole acquaintance. And his voice was the voice of a man reading off instruments he had stopped trusting. And he said, Walt, 34 frames are ruined. Base fog, moisture, exactly as predicted, unreadable. He said the last 3 are perfect. He said, not survivable perfect, Walt. Perfect like they were processed yesterday. Grain like a textbook plate. He was quiet a second, and I could hear his fluorescent lights buzzing down the line. And then Leland Duff, the driest man in Olympia, said the thing that told me the Sandvin case had never for one day been closed. He said, Walt, the rest of that roll aged 12 years. These 3 did not. I have no mechanism. It is as if something up there kept them. I drove to Olympia the next morning, and Leland Duff met me at the lab door with cotton gloves, and we went into the viewing room, and he put 3 frames on the light table, in sequence, and stood back, and did not narrate, which was itself a first, and I am going to give them to you now, friends, one at a time, the way the light table gave them to me, and I am going to go slowly, because I promised you, at the start of this account, that you would have them, and a promise to you is the only jurisdiction I have left. Frame 35. Taken at night, flashlit, from ground level, from just outside the tent door, and the frame counter, and the door angle. Both say Errol stood in his vestibule to take it, boots still off, shooting out into the dark of the clearing. The picture shows what it should show, friends. The great mossed trunks at the clearing's edge, the ferns silvered by the flash, his own guy lines crossing the bottom of the frame, all of it needle sharp. His camera, remember, was on nothing. No tripod, handheld, and the foreground is sharp as an engraving, which tells a photographer the shutter was fast, which matters, because of the trees. The trees in the background, friends, the big trunks at the edge of the flash fall 30 feet away, are blurred. Not out of focus. Leland Duff made me say it correctly, and I will make you hear it correctly. Motion blurred, smeared sideways and slightly upward, all of them in the same direction, the way a photograph blurs a thing that is moving fast, and the ferns in front of those same trunks are frozen still. I pulled the weather record myself. Friends, it is in the file, or it was. The station at the Ranger District for the overnight of the 6th and 7th of November. 1989. Recorded wind of 0. Dead calm, rain and fog. The ferns agree. Notice. 10 feet in front of those trunks, nothing is stirring. Whatever is smeared in that photograph, it is not the forest moving, friends. It is something the size of the forest, moving through where the forest stood, between the flash and the dark, fast enough to beat a shutter that froze falling rain in the same frame. Frame 36. Also flash, also handheld, and blurred over all now, the whole frame shaken. A photograph taken by hands that had stopped being a photographer's hands and become a frightened man's hands, and it is pointed straight up. Straight up from beside the tent, up the underside of the giant spruce that sheltered his camp, the flash reaching maybe 40 feet into a ceiling of black limbs. And I have looked at this frame longer than at any photograph in my life, friends, in the years when I still had access to it. And I will tell you only what is actually on the film, the way Duff taught me, and you may do with it what your own lamp allows. High in the flash fall, between the third and fourth visible tiers of limbs, there is a pale area. It is not a bird, it has no feather edge, and it is far too large. It is not fungus and not a barkless scar, because it crosses in front of one limb and behind another. Friends, it has depth. It is in the tree, not on it. It is smooth. It is long. It is oriented vertically, head down if it has a head, and at its lower end, at the very limit of what the flash could reach and the grain can hold, the pale area divides, friends, into what a man who had never been in that clearing would innocently call fingers. Leland Duff's written note on frame 36 is 4 words long. Unidentified pale form, canopy. And under the magnifier, he showed me the one detail that has never once left me, that the smear of frame 35 and the pale form of frame 36 are lit differently. The form is lit harder, closer to the flash. Between the two frames, friends, between one wind of the film advance, 1 second, 2, it had come most of the way down that tree, and it had made, in a forest where a rifle sounds like a dropped book, according to a man awake and listening 10 feet away, no sound at all. That is the moment, we believe, that Errol Sandvin put his knife through the wall of his tent. Away from the door, friends. You understand. The door faced the tree. And then there is frame 37, the last exposure on the roll, and the reason a state examiner with 30 years of service locked his own light table in a cabinet, and the reason men I never met drove out from a federal building the following week. And I am going to describe it to you as evidence, friends, level, and slow, because it deserves a witness who does not flinch. Frame 37 is in perfect focus. It is not blurred. It is not shaken. It is composed. Friends, if you can hear that word the way I had to hear it, the frame is composed, centered, level, the way a patient photographer composes, and it is taken from above, from high above. Duff worked the geometry from the tent's dimensions and the lens data, and his figure, in the file, is a camera position 38 to 44 feet above ground level, which agrees, you will have noticed, friends, with a black nylon tripod strap lashed to a limb at 41 feet. The flash fired straight down through the branchwork, and it lights the roof of Errol Sandvin's tent with the long knife-cut dark across it like a closed eye. It lights the 11 sock prints. Friends, they are in the photograph, a neat curved line of them, out from the tent into the center of the clearing. The picture was taken the same night before the rain filled them. And it lights Errol Sandvin. He is at the end of his own footprints, at the 11th print, on his knees in the mud, in his socks, his hands down at his sides, not raised, not warding, down, open. and his head is tipped all the way back on his shoulders, and his face, 60 feet of dark November air below the lens, is turned straight up into the flash, and his eyes are open, and his mouth is open. And I have stood over the light table with a loop on that man's face for hours of my one life, friends, and I will report to you what is there, because nobody else living will. It is not the face of a man looking at a bear, or a cougar, or a fall, or any death that has a name in the coroner's manual. I have seen all of those faces. They have fear in them, and fear is busy. Fear is a working thing. There is no fear in Errol Sandvin's face. There is comprehension, friends. It is the face of a man who has just been shown what the world is. All of it. At once. At night. From above. And beneath the comprehension. And this is the part I have never said aloud until tonight. There is. God forgive him. And me. And all of us. There is awe. That is the last photograph, friends. 1 second of flash, 41 feet straight down. An engineer from Aberdeen, kneeling bootless in the freezing mud at the end of 11 footprints, looking up into the eye of his own camera with awe. And the film advanced 1 frame, ready for the next exposure. And the next exposure was never taken. And you know the question, friends? You have been holding it with me since the first minute of this account. And here in the dark of part 4, I will say it one time, plainly, and then never again, because it does not get smaller with repeating. A camera does not hold itself, friends. A camera does not compose. Something at 41 feet framed that photograph and steadied it and fired it and then wound the film. Friends, the film was wound and lashed the case to the limb with a sailor's patience, tucked in against the trunk where 12 years of storms could not take it and no eye could find it, and kept in some fashion. Leland Duff has no mechanism for those 3 frames as fresh as the hour they were made. It documented him. It filed him. And it left the record where records are left in that forest. Friends, high up, in the dark, above the reach of everything that walks. What happened to the evidence is the part of this account I can tell fastest, because it is the part with the least mystery in it. Friends, it is only government. And government I understand. Duff filed his findings up his chain, because he was Duff, and the truth was his trade. And I filed mine up mine. And for about 9 days the Sandvin case was, quietly, the strangest open file in the state of Washington. And on the 10th day, 2 men in good gray suits with federal credentials of a flavor I had not seen before, and have not seen since, sat down in our conference room, thanked the county for its diligence, and explained that the materials had been determined to bear on matters of federal land management and public safety, and would be transferred. All of them. The camera, the case, the strap, the film, the prints, Duff's originals and his notebooks, my 89 folder, friends, my own 11 sock prints, out of my own drawer. They had the inventory, and the inventory was complete. And I want to be careful here, because I promised you level testimony. They were not sinister men. They were tired, polite, thorough men. And one of them, the older one, shook my hand at the door and held it 1 extra second and said, "For what it is worth, detective, your work was sound." And I said, "Then tell me what I found." And he looked at me, friends, a long human look, and he said, "You found the reason places like that are still standing." And they carried the Sandvin case out to a gray sedan in 11 bankers' boxes, and no request, no letter, no lawyer the family ever hired, and they hired good ones, has ever located 1 page of it since. The official file today, What a records request returns you is 4 sheets. Missing person, presumed hypothermia, 1989, closed. A tent, some weather, a signature, mine. But here is what the tired men in the gray suits did not understand about counties, friends, and I say it with affection for them, wherever they are. Paper is not where a county keeps things. I had stood at that light table for 2 days, with a loop before they ever drove out from their federal building. And a detective's memory, trained for 30 years on faces and inventories, is not transferable property. Leland Duff retired in 2006 and lives above a marina in Anacortes. And twice a year, until his eyes went, we sat on his deck and read each other the file, friends out loud, from memory, frame by frame, measurement by measurement, correcting each other like 2 old choirmen keeping a hymn. And if you think that is a strange ritual for grown men, you are right, and it worked. The account you have heard tonight is that hymn, and I will put its accuracy against any banker's box in any federal warehouse in this country. Ione Bratsburg retired her last dog in '96 and never trained another. And when I finally told her, over her kitchen table, what frame 37 showed, she was quiet a while. And then she said, "So Duchess was right." And I said, "Right how?" And Ione said, "She never once looked into the woods that day, Walt. I go over it and over it." She sat and she whined, and the whole time, her ears, her nose, everything on that dog was pointed up. And the Decker brothers, friends, who took a public lands trespass citation on the chin, rather than leave the case in the Crown where they found it. Because, as the older one told the judge, with the bark still on his hands, some things you do not leave tied to a tree. The Decker brothers never cut on the west side again, either of them. Not one contract, and when I asked the younger one why, years on, he looked at me like I had asked why he did not eat off the floor and said, "Mister, we dropped 1 tree in 100,000 acres, and it was the one with that on it. What are the odds we were let to?" You think about what he said, friends. He had worked that forest his whole life, and his instinct, the instinct of the man closest to it, was not that they had found the camera. It was that the camera had been handed over. Errol Sandvin's sister is still living, and she has heard everything you have heard tonight, from me, at her own kitchen table, years before you, because she had stood at the back of 12 Novembers earning it. And when I finished, friends, she did not cry, and she did not ask about the pale form, and she did not ask what I thought it was, which is the question everyone else asks, and the question I will disappoint you on tonight as well, because a witness who starts guessing stops being a witness. She asked one thing. She asked, "Was he running when it ended?" And I said, "No, ma'am." He was kneeling, and he was looking straight at it. And near as an old detective can read a face, he was not afraid. And she nodded, slow, and looked out her window at the ordinary maple in her ordinary yard for a while. And she said, "Then it saw him. All those years, photographing the big trees, driving out every weekend alone, that whole quiet life, and at the end of it, it looked back at him. And friends, I have turned her sentence over for years, the way I once turned the file, and I cannot improve on it as a finding of fact. Something in the oldest forest we have looked back at Errol Sandvin and took his picture doing it, and kept the picture safe. And I do not know, to this hour, whether what happened in that clearing was the worst thing I ever worked, or the only case of my career where the missing man got, at the very last, exactly what he had spent his whole life, reverently trying to get from the forest: attention. So here is your rule, friends. And it is the hose rule, and old Iones and duchesses, and it costs nothing to keep. When you go into the old woods, the true old woods, the kind where the light comes down green and your own footsteps go quiet, look up. Not scared, friends, just regular, the way you check a crosswalk. Look up when you pick your camp. Look up when the birds stop. And if a good dog sits down and will not go, and her nose is pointed at nothing you can see, believe the dog. Take her home. Sleep somewhere with a ceiling you built. Because the ground, friends, the ground we watch all our lives, the trail, the tracks, the map, that is our floor, and we know our floor. But a forest 300 feet tall is a building, and we walk its lobby, and everything above the second story belongs to whatever keeps the records up there, and it has been keeping them, patient as moss, since before our kind came up the rivers. And one last thing for a retired man's map. Put in the comments your town and the tallest old thing that stands over it. A tree, a ridge, a water tower. I keep a list now, the way I once kept inventories. And some nights reading it, I am comforted by how many of you sleep under something tall. And some nights, friends, I am not. Thank you for standing the watch with me tonight. Look up once on your way in from the car, and leave a light on. Good night.